नमस्कार, जय हिंद, जय भारत एंड वेलकम टू डेव टॉक्स। दिस इज आदि अचिंत। हमारे साथ हैं रामी निरंजन देसाई जी। पहले तो नमस्कार, वेलकम टू द शो।
Thank you, Adi. Always good to be here.
थैंक यू सो मच। एंड लास्ट टाइम हमने वी स्पोक अबाउट द फैक्ट कि भाई वहां पर मणिपुर में कोबरा कमांडोज हैव गॉन इन, देयर वाज सम एक्शन जिसमें 5 टेररिस्ट को मारा था। देयर वाज अ लॉट व्हिच वाज हैपनिंग एट दैट टाइम, सो वी डिस्कस्ड ऑल दैट डायनामिक।
Hmm.
नाउ टू बिगिन विद, आई वांट टू आस्क हर कि हमारा जो इंटरनल पोजीशन है, एंड टू द पीपल दैट आर जॉइनिंग अस राइट नाउ, इन ऑन आई थिंक फ्राइडे वी डिस्कस्ड दिस, लास्ट फ्राइडे वी डिस्कस्ड दिस, दैट देयर इज अ सर्टेन चेंज इन द सिक्योरिटी आर्किटेक्चर जो इंडिया कर रहा है। आर्मी के थोड़े से हाथ फ्री हो रहे हैं, लॉट ऑफ अदर ग्रुप्स हैव गॉन इनसाइड, CRPF is strengthened in this and that. What do you think is being planned in this area? Because violence तो नहीं है, but there is sporadic violence still happening right now from both the sides. So what do you see as is there some change that you see? Is there some difference that is going to come up in the security of that region, especially Manipur and Mizoram?
Look, I don't know what is going to happen. One can only speculate, and one can only put oneself in, you know,
Yeah,
people's shoes and see that, what would I have done? And I honestly feel that, you also know this, that Manipur is militarized in terms of the amount of forces that are there, personnel that are there, to an extent that we haven't seen for a while. And even then, if people have the guts to be doing this, means that they're still soft on local groups. um, it's not that, it's not just about emotional or ethnic differences any longer. It feels like every time things start getting calmer, something happens, some group will do something heinous, not even something low grade, something completely heinous, like we saw what happened to the Nagas, where there are definitive uh, signs of torture. That will raise emotions again. And now, with the Nagas also jumping in, it's a complex situation, obviously. And we, from the very beginning, have been saying that we hope that nobody else jumps in, that the third community doesn't jump in. But that's happened. So I think if I was in this position, and I've written an article recently, and it's an idealistic article. When you write articles, it's not, you have 800 words, you have 1,000 words to put your thoughts in. So it's never, it's a lot more focused. And I wrote the article saying that the only way forward for Manipur is disarmament. The reason I said that is, of course, it requires a lot of steps. And I've said that in my article, that there are many steps to it, that the primacy of the state will have to be established, that accountability will have to be fixed, not just on culprits, but even on our security forces, wherein they should be responsible for what they are controlling, the regions that they are controlling, areas that they are controlling, for what happens there. That dialogue will have to happen. But finally, by hook or by crook, these weapons, and it's not just the weapons that have been stolen, but weapons will have to be taken out, away from the hands of civilians, because those weapons, more often than not, will be used to justify actions that are, they had a weapon and therefore it, ended up like this. If things get heated, you always have weapons to lean on. Of course, I know this more than anybody else, that it's not just about the weapons that were looted from the Sioux camps, but there are weapons also that may be coming in from Myanmar. And therefore, accountability and the primacy of the state has to be such that it becomes a deterrent, that people who are bringing it in should be petrified, that if they are caught, the consequences are going to be so severe, if they're indulgent in any illegal activity, that they will not be able to get past that. I am not somebody, Ari, um, I don't feel that, you can rough your way in. I feel that there is a lot of layers in situations like this where people's sentiments matter. But at this point, I also feel that for the people whose sentiments matter to us, it is critical that we secure their safety. And their safety can only be secured if they're not being kidnapped, if highways are not being held to ransom, that weapons that have been looted, illegal weapons, are not being used against them. And therefore, I have written that articles because I feel that all civil people should come on board and say, look, we don't want any weapons here. And the argument also, I know, is going to be what? One group is going to say to another, and this is going to happen amongst all groups, that it is for our protection.
See, my main question here, a lot of these groups are, see, what we see as online propaganda. So let me just address that first. Oh, Indian armies, and Assam rifles are soft to this, but not to that.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of comparative which is done between the groups, and that was very, very active when the Meiteis and the Kukis were fighting. Now, when the Kukis and Nagas have started fighting, that comparative is still not that much, but there is little bit that happens there as well. So that ecosystem is still there. Oh, Indian army is favoring this, favoring that, favoring this, favoring that. Somewhere down the line, there is that particular confusion because the amount of the kind of groups that are there. I'm saying the Indian groups which are there. There is obviously a softer hand towards them. The guys who are based in Burma and doing all this stuff, there's a harder hand towards them, and that's a sort of a this thing. So how do you think, you're talking about the confidence now, about 75-76% of the weapons have been recovered. What makes this place calm down? Looking at the security forces inside it, everything is just, it's like a khichdi.
Look, it's not just, Assam rifles. If you look at Manipur police, if you look at other security forces, everybody feels that there's a bias. Or, there'll always be one group that will say there's a bias to this, there's a bias to that. That set aside, I think, like I said, that there needs to be some amount of action on ground where there is accountability fixed not just on perpetrators, but accountability fixed on control, people who are controlling areas. So if something happens, that is your strategic failure. And therefore, I think everybody, all the parties involved need to come and work together. There needs to be some level of integration, some level of intelligence sharing, because then there are dime a dozen problems, but there is no solution. So I think the time for making excuses for anybody is over. And now, like I said, as much as I don't believe in just heavy handed coming down like, an iron fist, I don't believe that at all times is the correct way forward. But I think deterrent is always something that prevents people from indulging in certain activities that they shouldn't be indulging in. So I would more call it deterrence that needs to come in, and the center hopefully, it makes, whoever is responsible really accountable. Because look, I don't think there is a clear path as such in terms of people wanted a chief minister to be removed. That was a real bone of contention at one point. That was done. Then people wanted a president's rule. That was a bone of contention. That was done. Then people said, no, 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 we want popular government to come back. Popular government comes back. That was done. None of this has been a solution, right? So what does that tell you? Is it a political solution? So I just think everybody needs to come together. I think, uh, there needs to be examples that are set. We've done a good job by recovering some weapons, but I said even those 20%, 25% that are left are probably, being misused. There's also weapons, there's the possibility of weapons coming in. I think the borders need to be really monitored, and uh, you need to come down very heavily on those people who are indulging in these activities. I think anybody trying to make rudimentary weapons at home, we've seen that also happen, and using them. I don't think there should be now a case for any justification for the use of violence, is all I'm saying. And if that means forcefully taking away weapons, that should be done. If that means forcefully rearranging the agreements of suspension of operation, then that should be done. Because clearly none of these people who are protecting these agreements and protecting their communities are really interested in long-term, benefit of Manipur. Look, one has to be a little harsh at times like this, because frankly, this is tiring and impacting poor people in the state. But then it's also impacting people like us who care about these regions, the rest of the country, because you feel that there's going to be an entire generation that is of young children who are going to suffer, because this is what they're going to see, and it's going to leave lasting scars on them. What about the internally displaced people? What sort of a future do they have? Who's talking about them now? So eventually, for the sake of some sort of humanity, you need to start taking stricter action, and people in the state must come on board on that stricter action, because sure, there are going to be situations that you're not going to like, but it's for the greater common cause. And I think time for dialogue is over. I think there should be a limit given to dialogue. You want to come on board, come on board. This is your time. You don't want to come on board, we're coming in. And this is the message that needs to go to all groups that feel, or that have, that feel that militarizing themselves is the only way forward. There's a line that I've written in that article, that giving up weapons is not a surrender in a situation like this. It is possibly an act of courage, because it tells you that you don't need weapons to rely on, that you are thinking of the long term future of your state. And whoever does that will be the person who will always have that moral high ground to say that I cared about the state more than you did. And that's why I did this.
It's like that typical पहले आप syndrome. तू पहले डाल फिर मैं डालूंगा, तू पहले डाल मैं फिर डालूंगा. It's
I'll tell you
becoming like
something. A lot of people who are doing this also are really not doing it because they feel that they're threatened. They're doing it because they feel empowered by the weapon.
that. Yeah, it's more of the show and
Yeah,
macho.
like, I'm a macho guy. I wear, I'm wearing combat clothes, and I have a rudimentary weapon in my hand, and this sort of bravado is just not going to work. Sure, there was a time when people felt insecure. They, defended themselves. But look, how long is it going to go on for? Is this what you want your kids to see? Because you get caught, your child goes to jail, his career's over, his future is over. What are you going to do? So, क्या development वगैरह की क्या बातें कर सकते हो if there isn't any peace? And of course, there'll be a lot of you know, some useless fellow sitting somewhere will say, oh, you don't understand, disarmament is not that easy. Sure. Do you think one doesn't know that disarmament is not easy? Don't state the obvious. It is tough, but what are the options? How do you go forward when, you know really, like, unwanted elements in a society are armed to the teeth?
Mm. See, there's another angle to it now. The amount of drugs which is there, since Afghanistan is reduced quite a bit, right? Uh, they have their stocks and stuff, and somebody did some study to figure out, yeah, there are stocks there in Afghanistan, but it's not as much as what it was. So as Afghanistan reduces that imprint, and it's not going to go zero, there's no question about it. But then, if it reduces, it puts a lot more pressure on the eastern side of India to kind of, what do you call, to produce and fill up the demand around the world. Now, when you see the reality of the way that the drug market works, and Myanmar becoming one of the largest producers of drugs in the world, oh wow, that's what you want. So how does that impact the whole ecosystem here?
Look, of course, no country across the world can 100% tackle the drug problem. Even Afghanistan, yes, they clamped down on poppy cultivation, and therefore a lot of it shifted to Myanmar. And Myanmar now has emerged as one of the biggest narcotics hub. Myanmar, the Golden Triangle, so as to say that entire region, has now uh, revamped itself, including with massive production of synthetics. There's absolutely no denying that Afghanistan also has, you know, cultivation and, that there are its own supply of opioids that are going out. No denying that. Is it as big as before? No, it isn't. Did it help this region become into the biggest producer? Yes, it did. So it's just quantities have shifted. Um, when you look at synthetic drugs, they can be made anywhere. They could be made in any country, in the West. It could be made in any country in the East. You need a small lab. You're not dependent on large agricultural farms. You're not dependent on weather. You're not dependent on great amount of manpower. Uh, a lot of the precursor material can come in terms of medical grade sort of precursors, so it can be bought legally as well. Of course, a lot of it is illegal as well, and this is across the world. Of course, it is a huge problem because now the contours of narcotics has changed. It's become synthetics, easier to produce, easier to traffic, faster manufacturing, easier to consume, um, easier to, more difficult to track because the amount of variants that keep coming out, it becomes very difficult for agencies to keep a track of because by the time they've picked up on it, it's already out in the market. I'll tell you a small case. Like, for example, even Yaba pills, which have been in the market since the 70s.
Hmm.
If there is a particular syndicate that is selling them, and there's been a couple of bad trips that people have had on it, and it's got a bad reputation, they stamp these pills, right? They just change the stamping, they just change the colors. So people again start feeling that, oh, this is a new type that's come out. It's almost like they rebrand it. So narcotics has also become like selling chocolates, right? You rewrap it, you rebrand it, and people keep buying it. um there are, it's called new psychoactive substances, NPSs.
Yeah.
NODC only in 2025 tracked 1,400 of them. So it's very important that, India has done a really, really good job because we were on the ball. We declared war on drugs. It became a really like a powerful policy pushed by the MHA. Uh, there were integrated systems that were put in place. It was directly monitored by the MHA. There was intelligence sharing that they started with other countries. So we realized the depth of the problem very soon. However, to track all of this, because it uses many routes, it's trafficked in many places. Um, You need to have a system where there is integration of intelligence and information sharing. And sure, a lot of Western countries, the UK will tell you that they're doing it. They're doing it with India. There are systems in place. We have to not be so cocky about it, because we are the ones who are fighting against it. We, as in, I don't mean India. I mean anybody who is a part of these integrated systems. We have to know that we are fighting against it. So we are always tracing the steps of where this illicit economy is taking place through the routes and trafficking and production. So it's almost like we'll always be one step behind. To crack it down fully is nearly impossible, at least in my opinion. There'll always be ripe environment for synthetic drugs. Now you look at narcotics. We're talking about yaba pills. We're talking about methamphetamines.
Yeah.
Coming in from Myanmar. Remember my last article on Captagon, the seizure that we made at Mundra Port, and then there was a seizure that was made in Delhi, and it was in South Delhi. Right in front of one of the busiest malls, under everybody's noses.
Hmm.
You always think it'll be in some, I'm sure it was a dingy
Yeah,
place, but you
yeah,
always
yeah,
think
of
it'll be
course.
like far out place. It was in the middle of like this upmarket like area. Now, that tells you that not only is it being used through land routes, but it's also being used through sea routes. If it's being used through sea routes, what is the kind of technology that we need to employ to be able to keep our ports safe? Because look, majority of your trade happens through sea routes. They come on ports. So the quantity of the kind of cargoes that are coming in are huge. How do you monitor all of it?
Yeah.
Are we just depending on information coming in, intelligence coming in? We can't be doing that. Yes, there is superior technology, that just scans in terms of, it's just a scanning, around the air, around cargoes, where it can pick up on narcotics and, things like that, just chemical scanning. Have we started investing in that? And again, I don't mean India, I mean across the world. Are we prepared? Are coast guards across the world prepared to find shipments going through illegal routes in the sea?
Yeah.
So this sort of new development, and look, you know it better than anybody else that all of this economy, illicit economy, supports insurgencies, supports, they're all involved in it, supports the kind of weapons that they can buy, the kind of sustenance they can have. How is an insurgency, or how is any sort of militant group, any sort of terrorist group sustained? Do you think cadres live on ideology and fresh air? No, they don't. They need salaries, they need food, they need weapons, they need training, they need money to move around, they need money for their operations, they need all sorts of money. They need money for their luxuries to a certain extent, their lifestyle, so as to say. Captagon, why is it called a jihadi drug? It's called a jihadi drug because ISIS was using it to make its
People numb. Yeah.
soldiers more aggressive, to give them coping mechanisms. Because once you have it, you obviously, it helps you to cope. It keeps you aggressive for a couple of days. It justifies things in your head. It keeps you awake for a couple of days. You can fight more. The aggression, the adrenaline is supercharged. And therefore, it was called the jihadi drug. And sadly enough, it was not just used by the jihadis, but it was also used by the people who were impacted on ground to cope with the kind of terror that they saw. And when we mean terror, we don't just mean death. Death is in situations like what ISIS has put its people through is probably you got lucky if you were dead or you saw somebody die. It's the torture, it's the rape, it's the, just loss of, any sort of human essence that is difficult for the human mind to cope in. So it was victims that were taking captive in as well. So it's a huge problem. Synthetics is across the world, and it's something that I'm not quite sure the world knows how to really counter, except in smaller measures.
You know, to me, the I think the biggest problem is going to be the illegals, right, which are there inside. Now, there is some mapping which is happening. They've mapped some amount of people, but that's too minuscule at the moment to kind of see where that thing goes. Uh, do you think once is there any I don't know how to phrase this even how do you handle that, because Bangladeshis is easy. You fence it, you throw them back, and it's simple as that. This area is not that easy. I mean, geographically, it's extremely difficult.
Look, I think Bangladeshis is also tough.
Yeah, but
Look at
geographically
what
it's
happened
easy,
in
right?
Assam. See,
You
though,
don't have valleys
correct.
and mountains
Think
and
about the thing about Bangladeshis is that there is a consensus on illegal immigration coming from there. There's some level of consensus across the country that look, illegal immigration from Bangladesh must be pushed back. Um, but there is no consensus on these people coming in because the rest of the country does not know much about the region, doesn't talk much about the region, doesn't know what is the illegal immigration, and most people from the region will also say, "Arey, but bahut chota number hai," right? My problem is not, see, at the end of the day, uh, and having traveled to these areas a lot and even to Myanmar a lot, look, the people of Myanmar see Indians as friends. And technically, Indians also see the Burmese as friends. We've never had like this sort of the kind of strained relationships you've had with the illegal immigration coming in from Bangladesh. However, what has happened is there are legitimate concerns. The legitimate concerns are because of what's happening across the border. Now, across India's border in Myanmar, these are not regions of peace and tranquility and so on and so forth. These are areas in conflict. When President Min Aung Hlaing came to India, and that bilateral visit happened, and it happened by chance because he was coming for the uh, International Big Cat Alliance, which got postponed, and then the two countries decided to switch this into a full
bilateral.
bilateral visit. At that point, there was a article that was written, and I was very surprised because it just makes for very bad diplomatic engagement by the National Unity Government, which is the NUG in exile of Myanmar, which criticized this visit and tried to finger point at India's foreign policy with Myanmar. And two things crossed my mind. Is one, that's really a bad diplomatic move. You have a very, very popular government in India. You have a very, very popular leader. And the Indian security forces are very popular with its people, right? There is no comparison to the government, to the leadership, and to the security forces of India as compared to Myanmar. Myanmar, there's always been this dichotomy in terms of people. There's a love-hate sort of relationship, with any leadership, with any security forces. That's not the case in India. And if that's not the case in India, you finger pointing are not doing yourself any favor and putting it up in a really big newspaper in India. You're not doing yourself any favor by because you're not going to gain any popular vote, popular confidence, and you're really going to alienate the government because the government is not going to take kindly at you virtue signaling. Yes, if the same article would have said we respect India's foreign policy, and here is what we are going to do, to support relations from our end, it would have helped. And what could they have said? This is my second problem, is that there were no policy recommendations. For example, you could have said, look, we understand India's legitimate concerns of whether it's weapons coming in from these areas into the Northeast. These areas are controlled by ethnic armed organizations who are a part of the NUG. We are willing to work with Indian security forces to clamp that down. We are willing to work with Indian security forces to tackle Indian insurgent groups that may be using our territories for movement. You don't have to say yes, they are, because obviously they don't want to maybe accept it. But to say that, yes, we want to work with you, would have gained them a lot of brownie points, because that's what we're looking at. We're looking at our borders to be secure. We have nothing against your people. And if there's a conflict and if they need humanitarian aid, India has always been the first responder. And we've never tom-tommed about it across the world, saying that, look, we've been the first responders. We've never gone around virtue signaling, saying, देखो हमने तो सबसे पहले ये दिया था. No. Now, if we haven't done that, then appreciate that and see how you can work together and build ways where, if your people are in need, India can help.
Help.
Illegal immigration is not the way. That will upset any country in this day and age when, there's a lot of competition, whether it's economic competition, whether it's, growing population. And India is a populated country. People have concerns. India could give medical aid. India could set up hospitals. India could give legitimate, visas for education to young people, because we understand, we understood this in Afghanistan also, right, Adi? That young people need education, that, we were, they're friendly to us and we should allow them refugee status, or not refugee status, we should allow them, a pass through India. Most of them ended up going and settling in America. I remember the 90s, we used to have people who'd, run away from the conflict in Afghanistan and who had admissions in even my school, or, were living within our colonies and then later moved on to, America and so on and so forth. But, India was a friend. India could do a lot of things like this if you were to approach it properly and also think about India's concerns instead of pointing fingers at India's foreign policy, which has always been that we will talk to anybody who is in government, irrespective of ideology, because we don't interfere in any country's internal politics. So I feel when you talk about illegal immigration coming in from Myanmar, um, it is of concern to us, as it should be. We need to be careful about who's coming in, what is coming in. Is there a demographic change? It should not be illegal. There should be absolutely no sort of involvement in illicit uh, any illicit activity within Indian territory. And anybody caught doing that, you know, God forbid they should be so scared to do that that they don't try to do that. But anybody caught doing that should really feel the heavy hand of the law of the land. But I would implore that they deal with us in a more sensible way, because these borders are important to us. We can come on mutual understanding, but you have to help us too. You talk about narcotics trade, a lot of it, if it lands in the Northeast, it's also coming through EO controlled areas. So help us fight it.
Hmm. Will that happen?
I hope better sense prevails, because eventually, I always, I always feel that it's the average poor person, your vegetable vendor, your local businessman, you know, your school teacher woman, it's people like that who are impacted. It's never the great insurgent leaders, the insurgent groups, the people who were talking about this great Nagalim. It's never those guys who get impacted. They're the guys with the fancy cars. Their kids are studying abroad. They have the big houses in their communities. Their day to day sustenance is not being impacted. So I do hope that this changes. I do hope that they realize that our concerns are legitimate. I do hope that biometrics and surveillance on our borders are increased really, really quickly. And by saying this, I don't mean that, this engagement that we've had on these borders, um, which have been legitimate through FMR and all, are stopped. No, the village hearts and all do a lot in binding people together. They've been a way of keeping these age old connections alive. So that has to sustain, but that has to sustain in a very monitored way. And it's not a problem. What does biometrics take you? आपके पास भूटान में नहीं है क्या? So, don't be scared of being, under some level of surveillance, because if you're on the internet, you're anyway on surveillance, So if you have no fear of that, then, this is something. And see, आप दूसरों को क्या कहोगे?
Hmm.
एफएमआर की जब बात आती है, सबसे ज्यादा प्रोटेस्ट तो हमारे साइड से होते हैं. एन एजुकेटेड लोग कि पूरा
Hmm.
फेंस करेंगे. Are you silly? Is it possible to put up physical fencing in 1643 kilometers? So I think we have to stop being extreme. We have to try looking at things in a balanced way. We have to try to see both sides of the coin, refrain from being radical on any side, understand ground realities, and sometimes pepper it with a little idealism. Because I think if we lose hope, Adi, we lose everything.
Yeah. That's the sad part of it. That is, a lot of it. See, apart from that, there's a lot of international kind of push to ensure that this place doesn't settle down. So
Absolutely.
yeah, my last question to you is that, do you see that kind of backing off a little bit, or is there something more that needs to be done to kind of figure that out? FCRA is one major thing which is now going to affect. It's going to come into,
Amazing.
yeah.
Long time coming.
Mm.
Adi, a lot of people like to, because we have such a binary way, a common man has such a binary way of looking at things, that if you say that this government has done a good job, they say, oh, BJP ka hai. you know if you say this government has a bad job, then ha, tum Congress ke ho. Nahi, people like us don't need to be kisi ke bhi. You're looking at things because this is your passion. And so I, not being a political person, can would like to say this, that I'm glad that this government is in power, because whatever said and done, whether it's procurement for our security forces, that has eased up, and everybody that I speak to says the kind of stuff that we can demand now, the kind of stuff that is given to us, we are so well equipped. We're equipped to our teeth.
Yeah.
And I've personally gone and seen some demos, and I felt so proud, that this is how the kind of importance that we lay to our young men, going out there, that they feel confident that they are no less, their training, their equipment, their protection is no less than any other military in the world. And they say it with pride. Can you imagine what it must have been like earlier on when you did training with other forces and you felt like the lesser person? Here the country backs you up. So, very, very proud about that. Very, very proud having seen some demos in certain very sophisticated training grounds. But I'll say this, we are very lucky to have this government because um, there is foresight from a security lens. Narcotics is also a security problem, which of course takes in turn takes many other shapes as it goes on, including it becomes a health problem. Like I've said many times, like look at the intravenous use leading to HIV in states like Mizoram or Manipur. It's a big
Mm.
problem. Other diseases. So it takes many other forms. It impacts your young people. It pulls them out of the workforce. It creates a negative environment. It keeps the state behind, so on and so forth. But eventually, it's the security lens that solves these problems.
Mm.
And therefore, I'm glad that that lens is there. And FCRA was something that should have been done long, long ago, many eons and decades ago, but I'm glad it's done now. But will international interference change? No, it won't. Why will it not? Because we just have too much happening. And it's not solely in the control of one country. Look at Bangladesh. We have our own concerns there, and it's not one country, it's multiple countries. Look at the Bay of Bengal. Look at Myanmar. Look at Nepal. These are all countries that have many, many actors in many, many different layers that are operating. And sometimes it's for natural resources, sometimes it's for strategic foothold, sometimes it's for uh, geopolitical reasons. For example, maybe countering a nationalist government like ours. It's for many reasons. So, no, it's not going to end. And of course, going into who those multiple actors are and the different layers of it and what they're interested in is a completely different podcast. So, I'm not going to go into that. But again, I will say this: when we try to make a move, let's say in the case of the Galathea Bay, you have our own political oppositions trying to
What do you,
stall it.
what do you need somebody from outside for?
Correct. तो पहले तो we have to keep wasting our time concentrating on these guys. And look, I made this statement and I got a lot of hate for it. That and this was in the Andamans, that the primary job of an opposition is not to oppose. People think if you're sitting in the opposition means jo bhi government kahe, you have to oppose. No, there's something called nation building also. You oppose where you feel that they are not right. You don't oppose for the sake of opposing it. There can be areas where there is a level of understanding where you say, yeah, this is good for the country. So that means that politics comes above country. If you agree with the statement that an opposition must oppose everything, then that means that your politics comes over and above nation building. So these kind of stupid arguments, I just look at it and I think, my God, this loser somewhere has a lot of time on his hands to make idiotic comments like this and put it out in public. But then what can you do? Everybody, uh, cannot be sensible. But, the cost of this, luckily, we are not living in a different time. But remember what the stalling of the Narmada project cost us. At one point, I think it cost us more than the initial cost of the project. At least stuff like that is not happening. But yeah, we need to handle these people before we go to handle anybody else.
ये तो यार, this is like a perpetual disease. I mean, it's like,
Yeah, it's a diseased mind. And to say that when the opposition was in power, they at some point thought this was a good idea. So the hypocrisy of it all is staggering.
That's
and
true.
obviously and obviously nobody wants to see nobody wants to see the details of the argument, so everybody makes an emotional judgment. And that is one thing that I feel is detrimental to uh, good dialogues, is this snap judgments, emotional judgments that people make only on the basis of political ideology. Nobody's reading long form, nobody is really following somebody. There was a time when we were younger where you would follow authors. You'd not follow one book. You'd follow a mind, no matter what they wrote. And sometimes they wrote rubbish in the middle, and you'd say, "Are kya ho gaya is bari?" But you wrote, you understood that the entire thought process.
Hmm.
Now it's like one-time wonders. It's like movies. Do you remember when earlier on you'd say, "Oh, what sort of like movies you like?" "Oh, we like mystery movies." "Who do you like in mystery movies?" You wouldn't name a movie. You'd say like the Agatha Christie movies or the Alfred Hitchcock ones. There was a whole genre attached to it. Same with books. Same with thinkers.
Yeah.
You know. Now we don't follow any thinkers. एक आर्टिकल पढ़ लिया, उसके बाद कमेंट कर लिया, आधा समझ गए सब्जेक्ट को, उसके बाद कमेंट कर लिया। इंस्टाग्राम में इंफॉर्मेशन, कुछ डेटा किसने डाल दिया, पढ़ लिया, कोई सर्वे था उसको पढ़ लिया। ये नहीं पूछा कि वो सर्वे कैसे हुआ है, वो सर्वे किसने किया है, फंडिंग कहाँ से आई है वो सर्वे की। It's like saying that USCRIF, United States Commission for Religious Freedom, if it says that India is at the bottom of religious freedom, then India must be at the bottom of religious freedom. It's that same sort of logic, right?
Hmm.
Not realizing that, it predominantly comes from it comes from an ideological bent of mind. So, yeah, there are problems, Zari, and more dialogues are needed. We don't have all the answers.
Yeah, we don't. But the main thing is, one big thing is that somewhere down the line, the game has started in the right direction now, unlike what it was, a couple of years ago.
We have the tools to counter it.
Mm.
We have really smart officers, we have really smart security forces, we have really smart thinkers, we have people like yourselves who are
Mm.
asking the right.
Think there.
Yeah, but people like yourselves who are asking the right question. See, you have to know a topic to even be able to ask the right question.
Yeah.
So people who are asking right questions, I'm very happy to see some new, not just podcasters, but also new online uh, media outlets coming out. Even if they're small, you see people wanting to write, people interested in geopolitics. All that is interesting. You don't have to agree with me, but to have an interest in what's happening across the world, what's happening in your country is very important to have. At one point, I feel, at least when I was growing up, one became just a non invested member of society. And the only time you talk about India in terms of a higher thing was Jammu Kashmir, in terms of an intellectual discourse. उसके अलावा ज्यादा कुछ मारी टाइम सिक्योरिटी, इंडियन ओशन, बे ऑफ बंगाल कौन ही बात कर रहा था. Yeah, that's my take for tonight.
No, that's there. That's there. I mean, it takes time for that strategic thought process to even begin to emerge, and it's not that easy for it to happen. Even you know,
Also, Adi, I feel because social media has a way of sort of pushing hate,
one
pushing
that,
blame.
and it also has a tendency of overstating something.
Correct.
Yeah.
So I feel sometimes, and I'm really starting to believe in it a little bit more, sometimes a little peppering of idealism, a little peppering of hope, a little looking at the other side with a little bit of kindness, sometimes, can be a balancing factor for yourself.
Hmm.
So I think that's something I wish we see a little bit more of, kindness coming back on social media, wherein two people are not abusing the hell out of each other, but can have a discourse and say, yeah, sure, have your own opinion, I don't really want to talk to you.
Yeah, well, that is there. That is correct.
So yeah, that's my Sunday evening idealistic.
Nahin, yeah, I agree with you, yeah, because the reason I want to talk about it, and let me just say this is that a lot of times, people like us are blamed कि यार आप इधर उधर बात करते हो हमारे बारे में बात नहीं करते. And I always do this. This week I've had two conversations about the Northeast. This is the second one. So I always focus Bangladesh. If I'm focusing this way, then it's this way, this way, this way. Currently, it's the neighborhood, right? And this my main channel is basically based on India's this thing. I've got another channel which I'm kind of trying to spread into larger world affairs, but this is more or less concentrated to the India and Indian neighborhood. So one, people need to understand this place. People don't know. I mean, half the people who are
इंटरेस्ट तो आ रहा है अब.
see half the people who are commenting about that area don't know the difference between NSE and IM and NSE and KYA. यार NSEN तो है. अरे नहीं भाई. मत बोल ऐसे. They're two different things. You know,
Yeah, but
IM, KYA, they're very different. So
see, like I say that, 20, 25 years that I've been studying these areas, who asked me? Who was interested? Nobody was interested. Nobody asked me, what is your opinion? Nobody wanted to publish me. Nobody wanted to talk to me. But with political will being concentrated in this area where it has brought it on the map, um, interest at least has been generated. Yes, it's a difficult area. There are many states. It's not, to be looked upon just as a region. So it'll take time. But I hope this interest continues. And, you know, that I think is an endeavor of mine that I hope, and it's all right not to understand really like the complex things in it. It's okay to start by the basics of the region and then build up. But can I also tell you that I also think people from the Northeast have to allow people from other parts of the country to want to study them, to not completely vilify us and try to have this uh, sort of superiority complex which says, "Arey tumko kya pata? Tum kya janoge?" Because then you're pushing people away, and that has many, many other uh, messages attached to it. People will say, oh, people, they just are not welcoming, or they just don't like us. So you have to allow people the ability to observe, to think, to say, um, to be wrong about you, just the way you have that right to do it anywhere across the country, on any subject, on any topic, anywhere in the world.
well, interesting. Let's wait and watch what happens. But for now, thank you so much, Ramiji, for your time. It's always a pleasure talking and
Thank
learning
you.
from you.
Thank you
So
very much, Ari.
let's hope things kind of fall in place. To the audience, thank you so much for joining in. Please video ko like kariye, subscribe kariye, and please check out our website www.thedevtalks.com and download the app ताकि आपको notifications आती रहे. If you want further details, you can check out the description on how to do that. Namaskar, Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.